Most stories do not start with a journalist. They start with people. Noticing when a river runs dry, asking why a school is changing, discovering something new next door. Curiosity is human. Your right to keep asking questions is at the heart of NPR's mission, and we are not going anywhere.
Hey, San Diego, it's Andrew Bracken in for Jade Hindman. Today, we learn about the efforts by the city of San Diego to improve city streets and fix potholes amid major budget challenges. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. As we learn more about the effects cell phones are having on kids' health and well-being, schools across the country are trying to adapt. They're trying all kinds of policies, from full-on cell phone bans to collection bins and even locked cell phone pouches. Here in San Diego County, several districts are weighing their options as well. Joining me to give us the rundown is Katie Anastas. She's education reporter here at KPBS. Hey, Katie.
Hi, Andrew.
Thanks for being here. So, in just a bit, we're going to talk more about this study on cell phone bans in schools and what they've found. But why are more schools just adopting these policies more generally?
I think these cell phone policies and the need to adopt them kind of reflect the convergence of a few big concerns. One is academic performance, and in fact, just this morning, new test score data came out from the Education Scorecard. That's been measuring students' academic recovery. And of course, we've heard a lot about the decline that happened during the pandemic, but one of the big takeaways from researchers this year is that scores actually started declining around 2013, and that's when a lot of young people started using social media. So, of course, they say that's not the only factor and that's not the only changes that were happening in 2013, but they say that's something to kind of take note of in that timeline. Of course, another concern is mental health, worries about anxiety, cyberbullying, and kind of what cell phone use is doing and social media use is doing to friendships and relationships.
Right. And there's a lot into that. And we're going to talk more about, this study and others like it. That brings us to the Phone Free School Act. It requires California public school districts to limit or prohibit cell phone use by July of this year. So what's going on there?
So a previous law had given districts permission to limit or prohibit phone use, and the Phone Free School Act actually mandated it. So lawmakers cited many of the reasons that we just talked about, worries about mental health, anxiety, and worries about students being distracted in class. So the law does say that students need to have access to their phones during emergencies, and if a teacher, gives them permission to use it for a school activity. And it also requires districts to review their policies every 5 years.
So what options are districts considering or already using to limit phones in schools? Because there does seem to be, the last year or so has been sort of an experiment for a lot of school districts, it seems.
Right. I think a lot of districts are putting policies in place, even years before that statewide law went into effect. Some schools are using lockable pouches, which I can talk more about. Some schools have said, keep your phone in your backpack and off all day. Some classrooms might have kind of a cubby or collection bin, like you mentioned, where students put their phone at the beginning of class and then take it out with them at the end of class. One kind of sub-policy within this that I'm interested in seeing if it evolves is policies around earbuds and smartwatches. That's kind of been a more recent development. Before this, I was just looking at Poway Unified's policies, and at Black Mountain Middle School, phones and earbuds have to be put away all day, including breaks, lunch, and on the bus. There's an elementary school in that district that also updated its policy because they've seen more kids using smartwatches, and this is an elementary school. And they had to come out with a policy that says you can only use your smartwatch to tell time. You can't use it for social media or texting.
But it just shows some of the challenges and some of the complexities with figuring this out. San Diego Unified, it's the county's largest school district by quite a lot, actually. It's almost a year into their first foray into phone-free school day policy. What do you know about the rules they have in place and maybe what might be changing.
So like a lot of districts, they kind of took a tiered approach. So there's kind of a blanket policy for all students, and then high schoolers get a little bit of more leeway. So their policy is that students have to have their phones off and out of sight during class, regardless of what grade level. They can use them on buses before the first bell, after school dismissal, and then during extracurricular activities. That's different than some other districts that do let kids use their phones on the bus. But high schoolers in San Diego Unified can use their phones during lunch and passing periods. And of course, following the state law, students can use them during emergencies. If they are a special education student and have an IEP that says they can use their phone, that's allowed too. But yeah, that's kind of an overview.
So they haven't implemented these pouches or some of these other options that you've outlined here. But much of your reporting is focused on Coronado School District, and they will require middle schoolers to lock cell phones in pouches starting next year. Tell us more about how they came to that decision and what that will look like.
So this decision was really interesting to follow. Board members went into it, deciding whether to use these lockable pouches just at middle school or to do this for both the middle school and high school. The middle school's principal described what they've done so far and explained that it just hadn't been working. Their rule had been keep your phone off, put it in your backpack all day. And she said that was just too tempting for middle school students. So I think what was interesting to me following this discussion was that I think, in high school, it's kind of assumed that most, if not all, kids have a cell phone. Middle school is an interesting age because it really varies depending on the family. There are some parents that are not letting their kids have a phone until high school, and there are some that, have given their kids phones even before they get to middle school and let them have free reign with it. So an image that kind of stuck with my mind was the superintendent at one point described going to the middle school and seeing, the few kids who had phones being surrounded by the kids who don't have phones. And it kind of changing just the way the lunchroom looks and recess looks because he described it as, the have and have-nots and that need to kind of have cohesion across the school.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're right. Middle school is such we've heard of wait until 8th movements, but there's such a range in when kids, have smartphones. What were some of the arguments for and against this approach of phone-free policies at Coronado?
So everyone seemed on board with the idea that this was necessary for the middle school. I think the debate was really whether they should do it at high school too. One con was the cost. So Yonder pouches would cost about $25,000 for just the middle school, and it would cost another $50,000 to put them at the high school. And in line with that cost concern, another argument against it was that students could find ways around the pouches. So in Los Angeles Unified, students have been using these Yonder pouches, but they've found ways to break the locks. They've put fake phones in there. There are ways that kids know to get around these things. So the concern among the board was, do we want to spend this amount of money on something that high school students especially would know how to get around?
Interesting. Yeah. So, what are you following next? We have about 30 seconds left, but there's still a lot happening here. What's next on your list of questions you have?
I think something that I want to continue watching in Coronado is that district leaders explain, the whole community will have to relearn some things. Parents might be used to texting their kid when their pickup time is going to change. And now parents will have to maybe call the front office again and get that message relayed to their kid. I've talked to students who hear about all of their sports practice schedules and game schedules through a team Instagram page. And that might be something that has to change too. So I think even though these rules are at the school level and focused on student use, I think to make it successful will require a bigger community shift, and I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Very interesting. Yeah, I am as well. Well, we'll be looking for more of your reporting on that in the coming weeks and months. I've been speaking with Katie Anastas. She's an education reporter here at KPBS. Katie, thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Welcome back to KPBS Midday Edition. I'm Andrew Bracken in for Jade Hindman. More than 2/3 of states now have some restrictions over cell phone use in schools. But how effective are those policies when it comes to improving youth mental health and learning outcomes? Last week, researchers published findings from the first major study on cell phone bans in schools. Joining me more to talk about it is Hunt Alcott. He's a professor of environmental social sciences at Stanford and one of the study's authors. Professor, welcome to Midday Edition.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So, tell us, what questions were you looking to answer with this research?
We were interested in the same sorts of discussions that you all had just been having for the last 15 minutes. What's happening in schools with smartphone bans, and what are the outcomes, what are the effects of smartphone bans if actually implemented?
And as we heard earlier in our show, different school districts have had different approaches so far. Your research focused specifically on using these pouches, right? Can you tell us more about how those are being used in the schools you looked at?
Yes, absolutely. So we actually, among other things in our paper, we survey about 100,000 teachers nationwide to ask them what policies are being implemented in their schools. And exactly as you're saying, there are a range of policies that are out there, from teachers kind of enforce things to stricter policies such as you can't have your phone on campus at all, or these yonder pouches that we study in our paper. So what we did is we wanted to focus on the policies on the stricter end, and we were able to partner with Yonder, which is the leading nationwide provider of these smartphone pouches, and they gave us data on which schools nationwide adopted their pouches and when, and that became then the key to our statistical strategy.
So let's dig into the findings here. Tell us more about what you found.
Well, so what we were able to do with the data from Yonder is then we know that there are 4,000 schools-ish that adopted Yonder pouches. We know what year they adopted. And then we can construct comparison groups from the remaining roughly 100,000 schools nationwide to see, trends in similar schools over time. And so that is our statistical strategy. Economists call it a difference in differences estimator. So with that, we then brought in a collection of student outcome data that includes test scores, large-scale surveys of student well-being done by a company called Panorama, and suspension records, basically how many students are being suspended. And so with all that, I'll tell you the first thing, which is when you impose a new rule, like you can't bring your smartphone to class, disciplinary problems go up. And some of that's mechanical, I think. It's just you have a rule and more people are going to break it. And some of that may be you get smartphones out of students' hands and they are, less, they basically have to find something to do with their time. And some of that involves breaking some other rule. So that's the first part of our study.
Tell us a little bit more.
So from there, we then went and looked at student self-reports on surveys of how they're doing in school. And I can say that when you survey, even before doing this research, we did a nationally representative survey of parents and students. And pretty much everybody thinks that banning smartphones in schools is going to improve test scores, improve student relationships, and improve mental health. Or it's not that everybody thinks that, but that's the sort of the bulk of public opinion. What we show, however, first with the student surveys, is that students actually don't report being able to pay better attention in class, and they don't report any reduction in online bullying. They do, perhaps after a couple years, report a potential improvement in what we call subjective well-being, basically how happy they are or how much less anxious and depressed they are. So that was the next set of results, basically limited effects on what students say is actually going on in the school, except for a possible improvement over time in subjective well-being.
Interesting. And your research kind of had a lot of surprising parts of this. What surprised you most about the results?
Well, the thing that was surprising to me, I think the most, was this final result, which is we see basically zero improvement in test scores. And that was surprising to me because as an educator myself, I teach undergrads and PhD students here at Stanford, and I definitely don't want my students using their smartphones in class. And similarly for myself, when I go to research seminars, I try to hide my smartphone because I know even for me it's distracting, and I'm 45 years old. So I would have expected that when you take a smartphone out of kids' hands in school, that they would feel like they're able to pay more attention in class. And when they take the tests at the end of the year, they do better on those tests. But we actually don't see that. So that was the biggest surprise to me.
I mean, you mentioned yourself as a teacher and kind of how technology's kind of, affected your work connecting with students. Tell us about the impact it's had on teachers, because your study did have some interesting findings there.
So I mentioned earlier that we had surveyed roughly 100,000 teachers now nationwide, and the teachers really like more strict cell phone bans, and in particular, they like Yonder pouches. So when you survey teachers and you ask them what were things like in your school before Yonder versus after, they report that students are much less likely to be misusing their phones in class, like distracting themselves in class. And overall, the teachers are much more satisfied with their school's policy after adopting Yonder. And so I think this to me is then an important piece of evidence that I bring to bear on how I would interpret these results. I think in some sense, you might think of our paper as being a negative result. Like we don't see that smartphone pouches improve test scores in a way that you might have hoped, but teachers really like it, and parents, and even and parents tend to support stringent bans as well. And so this to me is, there's several different outcomes that we're tracking, and the fact that teachers think that things are better, I think, is an important piece of evidence.
I want to turn to some of your other research. I mean, for years you have studied technology's impact on things like students, but last year you published some research looking into how quitting social media might affect well-being. Can you tell us more about those findings?
Yes, absolutely. So the paper I think you're referring to is a paper that we actually wrote in partnership with Meta Corporation and a series of researchers and a group of researchers at Meta, which of course is the owner of Facebook and Instagram. And they were interested in understanding the impacts of their apps on on outcomes, and in particular around the 2020 presidential election. So they paid a couple tens of thousands of users to quit Facebook or Instagram in the weeks before the 2020 election. And they then provided external researchers, including myself, with those data and signed away all of the company's rights to control how we did the analysis or presented the results. So it was actually just as an aside, a really interesting example of how a company can partner on a credible external evaluation that in some sense people reflects on their company. So with that background, we studied both effects on political outcomes, like how people voted and political polarization, but also there were some questions, which I think you're referring to, on mental health, or what we call emotional state or subjective well-being. In particular, how happy, anxious, and depressed people felt. And we found that quitting Facebook or Instagram generated, I'd say, moderately sized, but statistically detectable improvements in happiness and reductions in anxiety and depression if you were quitting Facebook or Instagram before the 2020 election.
Interesting. So, kind of coming back to this cell phones in schools, I mean, this topic around young people, social media, smartphone, it's just such a defining issue for a whole generation of kids and their families. And I'm just wondering, as a researcher, we have about, a minute left or so. How do you navigate that with all the emotion and opinions that can come into researching a topic like this?
Well, my job is to do credible research and then write it up clearly and then, talk to folks like you so that I think people have a sense of how scientifically I interpret the results. And then, some of that takes on a life of its own and is interpreted in different ways, depending on people's initial views. But, my own view, I'll tell you my own takeaway from all the research that we've done. It feels very important for me as an individual to maintain my own mental attention and focus on the real world as opposed to focus on my smartphone. And so I do as much as I can to keep my head out of my smartphone and instead with my family and the people around me.
I've been speaking with Hunt Alcott. He's a professor at Stanford University, and we'll have a link to his study on our website at kpbs.org. Professor, thanks so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's our show for today. I'm Andrew Bracken. KPBS Midday Edition airs on KPBS FM weekdays at noon, again at 8 p.m. You can find past episodes at kpbs.org or wherever you listen. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day.
Most stories do not start with a journalist. They start with people. Noticing when a river runs dry, asking why a school is changing, discovering something new next door. Curiosity is human. Your right to keep asking questions is at the heart of NPR's mission, and we are not going anywhere.